Hurricane Irma smashes Florida, bringing tornadoes, flooding and fierce winds. Hurricane Irma has made landfall in the Florida Keys as a powerful Category 4 storm, the U.S. National Hurricane Center, USNHC, reports. The center of the massive hurricane made landfall on Cudjoe Key in the lower Florida Keys at 9:10 a.m. local time, 11:10 p.m. EST. Irma lashed the area with maximum sustained winds near 215 kilometers per hour, and the USNHC said it was expected to remain a powerful storm as it moved through the Florida Keys and near the state's west coast. Tens of thousands of people huddling in shelters watched for updates as the storm swung to the west, now potentially sparing Tampa and Miami the catastrophic head-on blow forecasters had been warning about for days. In the Tampa Bay area, access to all of Pinellas County's barrier islands, including the popular spring break destination of Clearwater Beach, was shut off. The leading edge of the immense storm bent palm trees and spit rain across South Florida, knocking out power to more than 430,000 homes and businesses. As the hurricane's eye approached the Florida Keys, Carol Walterson Stroud, 60, and her family were huddled in a third-floor apartment at a senior center in Key West. "We are good so far," she said in a text message just before 5:30 a.m. "It's blowing hard." Stroud said she planned to step outside once the eye of the hurricane passed over. She said she has stood in the eye of a hurricane before and it was total peace and quiet. Authorities very concerned about sea surges. Florida Governor Rick Scott warned sea surges might devastate parts of Florida. He said a powerful sea surge would accompany Hurricane Irma as the storm moves through Florida, and that blast of ocean water could badly damage coastal areas. "I am very concerned about the West Coast," Mr. Scott said of Florida's western shoreline that faces the Gulf of Mexico. Earlier, Mr. Scott had warned residents in the state's evacuation zones on Saturday that this is your last chance to make a good decision. About 6.4 million people were told to flee. But because the storm is 900 to 1,000 kilometers wide, the entire Florida peninsula was exposed. Forecasters said the greater Miami area of 6 million people could still get life-threatening hurricane winds and storm surge of 1.2 to 1.8 meters. The head of the U.S. Federal Emergency Agency said the storm was bringing tornado watches and warnings around the state. "This is a worst-case scenario for Monroe County, the Florida Keys and the west coast of Florida," Brock Long, administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, told the Fox News Sunday. "Anytime you're in the northeast quadrant as the storm is moving forward, that's where the maximum radius winds are that define the intensity of the storm." 3 people were killed in car crashes, caught in Hurricane Irma's destructive path as it made landfall in Florida, according to ABC in the U.S. Announcing itself with roaring winds, Hurricane Irma plowed into the mostly emptied-out Florida Keys for the start of what could be a slow, ruinous march up the state's west coast toward the heavily populated Tampa St. Petersburg area. At least 1.16 million customers are without power, including more than 500,000 in Miami-Dade County. The eye of the Category 4 storm was 24 kilometers southeast of Key West, bringing winds up to 210 kilometers per hour and threatening dangerous storm surges. The eyeball is where the most severe weather occurs, while the eye of the storm brings calmer conditions. The National Hurricane Center announced the arrival of the eyeball in their 7 a.m. advisory, 9 p.m. ET. "This is an extremely dangerous and life-threatening situation," the National Weather Service in Key West said, urging those who had not heeded dire warnings to evacuate to take shelter now to protect your life. Florida's Naples Mayor Bill Barnett said he had never dealt with a storm like this. "This is just a monster," he said. Earlier, Florida Governor Rick Scott tweeted that life-threatening storm surges were already impacting the Keys and were expected to spread to southwest Florida. Flooding of up to 4.5 meters, enough to cover a house, were expected, and some areas are already experiencing heavy rain and hurricane-force winds. A tornado funnel cloud also formed off the coast of Fort Lauderdale on Saturday about 6:40 p.m. 8:40 am Sunday ET, with the U.S. National Hurricane Center warning that a few more were possible in south and central Florida. Earlier, the National Weather Service Key West said winds were imminent and told in the Florida Keys it is time to hunker down. In a tweet, it advised people not to go outside, to get away from windows and to put your shoes on now. Meanwhile, A woman has delivered her own baby after extreme winds kept paramedics away. For the first time, a tropical storm warning has also been issued for the city of Atlanta. The National Weather Service in Peachtree City, Georgia, said it was the first time such a warning had been issued for the metro Atlanta area. The warning means that tropical storm conditions are expected within the next 36 hours. Peak winds were expected to reach 48 to 64 kilometers per hour with gusts of up to 88 kilometers per hour. Hurricane Irma regained strength on Sunday as it began pummeling Florida, threatening almost the entire southeastern U.S. state after cutting a deadly path of destruction through the Caribbean. The storm, packing of winds of 210 kilometers per hour, was upgraded to a Category 4 storm as it closed in on the island chain known as the Florida Keys. The eye of the storm is expected to hit the Keys between 7 to 8 a.m. EDT, 9 to 10 p.m. the Sunday EDT, before moving near or along the peninsular state's west coast. It was expected to keep moving near or over the southwestern coast of the Florida Peninsula before traveling inland over the Florida Panhandle and southwestern Georgia on Monday afternoon. The storm's move to the west will potentially spare the highly populated areas of Tampa and Miami from the worst impacts. But St. Petersburg could get a direct hit instead. Neither St. Petersburg or Tampa have suffered a major hurricane in nearly a century. More than 6.3 million, nearly a third of Florida's population, have been ordered to evacuate. Florida Power and Light said more than 170,000 homes and businesses in the state had lost power, as the storm churned about 115 kilometers south-southeast of Key West. MacDill Air Force Base, the military installation home to U.S. Central Command, issued mandatory evacuation orders with the eye of the storm expected to pass near or over its home city of Tampa early Monday. The Kennedy Space Center was also closed. At least 25 people have been killed since Irma began its devastating march through the Caribbean earlier this week. Terrified Cubans rode out Irma in coastal towns, after the storm made landfall Friday as a maximum-strength Category 5 storm on the Camagüey archipelago, reported deafening winds, uprooted trees and power lines, and blown rooftops. There were no immediate reports of casualties, but officials reported significant damage. A total of 1.5 million people were evacuated. Authorities in Havana were evacuating people from low-lying districts at risk from Atlantic storm surges. Enormous waves lashed the Malecón, the capital's emblematic seafront, causing seawaters to penetrate some 820 feet into the capital, AFP journalists found. In Florida, cities on both the east and west coasts took on the appearance of ghost towns, as nervous residents heeded insistent evacuation orders. Irma is so wide that authorities were bracing for destructive storm surges on both coasts in the Keys. And hurricane-force winds are expected to lash the peninsula as it rolls north toward Georgia. On Highway 75 along the western coast of Florida, a steady stream of cars pressed northwards as thousands fled at the last minute. Strip malls, fast food restaurants and retail giants were all closed for business. In Key West, police had opened a shelter of last resort for those who had ignored mandatory evacuation orders. Scott Abraham, who lives on the 5th floor of a beachfront apartment building in Miami Beach, is planning to ignore evacuation orders and ride the storm out with his wife and 2 kids. "If I lived in a house I would have left, but if it gets flooded here it's going to take a week at least to come back. I don't want that," he said, warning that Irma would be worse than Hurricane Andrew, which killed 65 people in 1992. Florida Governor Rick Scott said all 20.6 million Floridians should prepare to flee. Cuban-American Orlando Reyes, 82, was forced to leave his assisted living facility in Miami Beach. "It is frightening," he told AFP at a shelter in Miami. "We had to leave without a cent, without taking a bath, or bringing anything." Among hundreds who elected to stay out the storm was Key Largo car detailer Philip Hodes's father Mike, who remained at home despite his family's urgings for him to leave with them. "My dad's staying down in the Keys. I guess he's crazy. They live in a nice concrete house and it's got impact windows and doors to hopefully keep him safe," said Mr. Hodes, 24, who is packed into an Orlando hotel room with his mom, dog Rascal and 6 others. We tried to convince him to leave, but he didn't really think it would get bad. I hope he's there when we get back. Irma's predicted path has shifted to the west coast of Florida, likely sparing former Sydney yacht broker David Nichols, who chose to stay in his home in Fort Lauderdale, on the southeast side of the state. Mr. Nichols, who has lived in Florida for 40 years and endured many hurricanes including 1992's catastrophic Hurricane Andrew, is still expecting a rough time as he rides out the hurricane with wife Sarah, in-laws and the family cat Newton. The track has veered to the left, so it's going to give us a big breather, Mr. Nichols told OP. I'm not overconfident. We'll still see high tropical, low hurricane force winds. It's just about being like a Boy Scout. Be prepared. The Nichols are in a single-level home on Fort Lauderdale's New River, and they have boarded up most of the windows. Path of destruction. The storm smashed through a string of Caribbean islands, beginning with tiny Barbuda on Wednesday, followed by the holiday islands of St. Bart's and St. Martin. Also affected were the U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, Haiti and the Turks and Caicos. The Bahamas were spared Irma's worst. Houses are smashed. The airport is out of action, St. Bart's resident Olivier Toussaint said. Upside-down cars are in the cemeteries. Boats are sunk in the marina. Shops are destroyed. Another powerful storm, Hurricane Jose, had been heading toward the same string of Caribbean islands Irma has pummeled in recent days, but the area received a welcome reprieve when the storm began to gradually weaken and shift course towards the north. The deteriorating weather had grounded aircraft and prevented boats from bringing relief supplies to hard-hit islands. The U.S. military was mobilizing thousands of troops and deploying several large ships to aid with evacuations and humanitarian relief, as the Air Force removed scores of planes from the southern United States. This is going to sneak up on people. Irma was at one time the most powerful hurricane ever recorded in the open Atlantic with a peak wind speed of 300 km/h last week. It left more than 20 people dead across the Caribbean, and as it moved north over the Gulf of Mexico's bathtub warm water, it was expected to regain strength. Meteorologists predicted Irma would plow into the Tampa Bay area on Monday morning. The area has not been struck by a major hurricane since 1921, when its population was about 10,000, National Hurricane Center spokesman Dennis Felgen said. Now around 3 million people live there. The latest course also still threatens Naples Mansion and yacht-lined canals, Sun City Center's retirement homes, and Sanibel Island's shell-filled beaches. Irma's course change caught many off guard and triggered a major round of last-minute evacuations in the Tampa area. Many businesses had yet to protect windows with plywood or hurricane shutters. Some locals grumbled about the forecast, even though Florida's west coast had long been included in the zone of probability. For 5 days, we were told it was going to be on the east coast, and then 24 hours before it hits, we're now told it's coming up the west coast. Jeff Bierbaum, a 52-year-old entrepreneur in St. Petersburg, said. Nearly the entire Florida coastline remained under hurricane watches and warnings, and the latest projections could shift again, sparing or savaging other parts of the state. Forecasters warned of storm surge as high as 4.5 meters. This is going to sneak up on people, Jamie Rome, the head of the Hurricane Center's Storm Surge Unit, said. Given its mammoth size and strength and its course up the peninsula, it could prove one of the most devastating hurricanes ever to hit Florida, and inflict damage on a scale not seen here in 25 years. Hurricane Andrew smashed into suburban Miami in 1992, with winds topping 265 km/h, damaging or blowing apart over 125,000 homes. The damage in Florida totaled $6 billion, and at least 40 people died.